They say that if you ignore the small signs, the truth will still find its way to you. I used to think that was just a saying, but now I know it's painfully real. What started as a typical week for me and my wife, Rachel, turned into something I never saw coming. I'm Andrew, 30, Rachel, 27, and I have been married for 5 years. Together, we run a small logistics company we built from scratch. It hasn't been easy, long hours, constant deadlines, but we've made it work. I handle the operational side of things, while Rachel oversees the administration. It's a partnership that requires trust, something I thought we had in spades. Rachel has always been someone who values routine. For years, she's had the same rituals: her morning coffee, her late-night yoga, and her monthly massage appointments with Linda, a therapist she's trusted since before we got married. Rachel used to say that Linda was one of the few people who could help her truly relax, and I never thought much about it. It was just another part of her life that brought her balance. Things started to shift about 6 months ago when Linda announced she was moving to a different city to be closer to her family. Rachel was disappointed but understanding, though I could tell she wasn't thrilled about finding a new massage therapist. Linda, ever accommodating, recommended her son, Ryan, who had recently graduated from massage school. Rachel hesitated at first, saying she wasn't sure if she'd feel comfortable with someone new, but Linda reassured her, and eventually, Rachel agreed to give him a try. At first, it seemed like a seamless transition. Rachel came home from her first session with Ryan looking relaxed, saying he was professional and skilled. She even joked that Linda had trained him well. For a while, I didn't think anything of it. Rachel continued her appointments every few weeks, and everything seemed normal. But then little things started to feel off. For one, Rachel began booking her sessions more frequently. First every 2 weeks, then weekly. She said it was because work was stressing her out more than usual, and the massages were helping her cope. It made sense on the surface, especially with how busy we'd been at the company. But the shift in her demeanor gave me pause. She seemed lighter, almost giddy, when she came back from her appointments, a sharp contrast to her usual tiredness after a long day. Then there were the changes in her behavior. Rachel had always been open with her phone, leaving it on the kitchen counter or next to her laptop while we worked. But now, she was more guarded. Her phone was always face down, her notifications silenced. She'd glance at it quickly when it buzzed, smiling faintly before putting it away. When I asked about it, she'd shrug and say it was just work-related messages or a group chat with friends. I told myself I was imagining things. Rachel and I were solid, weren't we? We'd built a life together, shared a business, and supported each other through everything. I didn't want to believe there was anything to worry about. But the unease in my gut lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One evening, as we were winding down after dinner, Rachel mentioned Ryan in passing, saying he was adjusting well to taking over Linda's clients. She said he was a great listener, and that their sessions often felt like therapy. I smiled and nodded, but something about the way she spoke about him stuck with me. She sounded fond, too fond. That night, as Rachel slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed the little moments I'd brushed off. The frequent appointments, the guarded phone, the way she lit up when she talked about Ryan. It felt like I was connecting dots that I didn't want to see. Still, I told myself I was overthinking it. Rachel was my wife, my partner. She wouldn't hide anything from me, right? After Rachel's casual mention of Ryan, her new masseur, something shifted in the way I viewed her weekly appointments. It wasn't jealousy or suspicion, at least not at first. It was just a feeling, a nagging unease that I couldn't shake. But I told myself I was imagining things. Rachel had always been committed to her routines, and her massages were just part of how she handled stress. Or so I thought. In the weeks that followed, Rachel's massage appointments became noticeably more frequent. Where she used to book sessions every few weeks with Linda, now she was going almost weekly. She said the extra time was helping her handle the pressure of work and life, and I wanted to believe her. But the way she talked about Ryan left me feeling unsettled. She'd mentioned how skilled he was, how he'd picked up right where Linda left off. There was an admiration in her tone that I hadn't heard before, not even when she talked about Linda, whom she'd trusted for years. I started noticing other small changes. Rachel began spending more time getting ready before her appointments. choosing outfits that felt a little too polished for a casual massage session, putting on light makeup, and even spritzing on perfume. When I commented on it, she shrugged and said, "It's nice to feel good about myself, even if it's just for me." It sounded reasonable, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right. Then there was her schedule. Rachel was suddenly busier than usual, often claiming she needed to stay late at the office to catch up on paperwork. Our business was demanding, and it wasn't uncommon for one of us to put in extra hours. But she'd never been this unavailable before, and I couldn't help but notice how often these late nights coincided with her massage days. Her phone, too, became a source of quiet tension. Rachel had always been open with her phone, leaving it lying around the house or handing it to me to look something up. But now, it was always with her, face down on the table, notifications silenced. She'd glance at it quickly when it buzzed, sometimes smiling faintly before putting it away. When I asked who she was texting, she'd brush it off, say it was work or a group chat with friends. It was a small change, but one that added to the growing feeling that something wasn't right. The tipping point came one Thursday evening. Rachel had left for another late massage session, saying she might grab dinner afterward since her appointment was close to her favorite cafe. It wasn't unusual for her to combine errands with her appointments, so I didn't think much of it until she came home. She arrived later than expected, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly messy. She dropped her bag on the counter and immediately headed for the shower without saying much. It wasn't like Rachel to be so quiet after her massages. Normally, she'd tell me how relaxed she felt or share something funny Linda, or now Ryan, had said. But that night, she was distant, almost nervous. As she showered, I stood in the kitchen, staring at her bag. My mind raced with questions I didn't want answers to. Was I being paranoid? Or was there something deeper going on? I decided to brush it off and give her the benefit of the doubt for now. But the next morning, the unease was still there. Rachel acted as if nothing was wrong, chatting over breakfast and texting on her phone with the same guarded smile I'd come to recognize. I watched her carefully, noticing the little things I'd ignored before. The way she avoided eye contact when I asked about her plans, the way she seemed to light up when her phone buzzed. For the first time, I let myself consider the possibility that Rachel wasn't being honest with me. The thought made my stomach churn, but I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The frequent massages, the extra time getting ready, the secrecy with her phone. It was all adding up, though I wasn't sure what it meant yet. I decided to keep quiet and observe. If Rachel was hiding something, I needed to know what it was before I confronted her. Accusing her without proof would only backfire, and the last thing I wanted was to push her further away. For now, I'd wait and see, hoping that my instincts were wrong. But deep down, I already knew they weren't. It started as a casual suggestion, something I thought might ease the tension that had been building between Rachel and me. I'd been observing her subtle changes, her increasing secrecy, the sudden frequency of her massages, and I couldn't help but feel like I needed to test the waters. So, one morning over breakfast, I told her I was considering booking a massage for myself. Rachel froze for a split second before plastering on a smile, but I caught the hesitation. With Ryan, I added casually, watching her reaction carefully. I expected her to encourage me. It would have been the normal response, the one she'd give if there was nothing to hide. Instead, her demeanor shifted. Her hands fidgeted with her mug, and she avoided my eyes as she said, "Oh, I'm not sure he's taking new clients right now. He's really busy." Her voice was light, almost too light, as if she were trying to downplay her nerves. It was subtle, but I've known Rachel long enough to recognize when she's uncomfortable. "He's fully booked for weeks," she added quickly before I could press further. "I'll ask him if you want, but I don't think he'll have time." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer, but inside, my suspicions deepened. Rachel was rarely this dismissive, especially when it came to things that could potentially benefit me. If she truly thought Ryan was just a skilled masseur, why was she so hesitant to let me see him? Her nervousness was palpable, and it only confirmed what I'd been suspecting. There was more to her relationship with Ryan than she was letting on. Over the next few days, Rachel doubled down on her excuse. She mentioned how busy Ryan was, how his schedule was packed with clients from Linda's referrals. She even went so far as to say he was thinking of cutting back his hours to focus on a smaller client base. The excuses came quickly, too quickly, and they all felt rehearsed. I played along, nodding and smiling as if I believed her. But inside, I was growing more certain that something was wrong. Her defensiveness was too strong, her explanations too practiced. I started wondering if she was trying to protect Ryan or herself. The more I thought about it, the more I realized her reaction wasn't just about Ryan's availability. It was about keeping me away from him, keeping me from stepping into her carefully constructed world. If I went to Ryan for a massage, I might see through the facade she'd built around their sessions. I might notice the way she acted around him, the chemistry she tried so hard to downplay. But I wasn't going to confront her just yet. I needed more than nervous reactions and flimsy excuses. If I was going to accuse Rachel of betraying me, I needed proof, something undeniable, something she couldn't twist or explain away. I decided to keep the pressure subtle, mentioning Ryan occasionally in passing, asking if she'd followed up about his availability. Each time, Rachel would find a new excuse, a new reason why it wasn't a good idea. "He's not taking new clients," she'd say one day. "He's completely booked," she claimed the next. It became almost comical how hard she worked to dissuade me, and with each excuse, her facade cracked a little more. Rachel's defensiveness only fueled my determination to uncover the truth. Her behavior wasn't just suspicious. It was a confirmation that she was hiding something. And now, I was more determined than ever to find out what it was. By this point, Rachel's behavior had gone from suspicious to downright strange. Every time I mentioned Ryan, even casually, she seemed to stiffen, her easy demeanor replaced by nervous laughter or quick excuses. I decided to let it drop for a while, giving her space to think I'd moved on from the idea of booking a massage. But in reality, I was paying closer attention than ever. Then, something unexpected happened, something that turned the entire situation on its head. One evening, as I was wrapping up work at our home office, Rachel came in, her face a mix of excitement and hesitation. She mentioned that she had a last-minute opportunity to go to a wellness retreat a few hours away. "It's perfect timing," she said, explaining that Ryan had recommended it as a way to deepen the relaxation and mindfulness she'd been cultivating through her massages. She framed it as a chance to recharge, to come back refreshed and more present. Normally, I would have supported the idea. Rachel had been stressed lately, or at least that's what she'd been saying, and a weekend away sounded like a good way for her to unwind. But something about the way she presented it felt off. She was too eager, her words carefully chosen, almost rehearsed. She didn't ask if I minded her going. She assumed I'd agree. It wasn't the retreat itself that raised red flags, it was the timing. She'd never mentioned anything about it before, and now, suddenly, it was all planned out. She had the itinerary, the accommodations, even the travel arrangements. When I asked how she'd heard about it, she quickly brushed over the details, saying Ryan had connections with the retreat center and had helped her get in last minute. Her explanation didn't sit right with me. Why would her masseur, someone who was supposed to be a professional, be so involved in organizing her personal plans? And why hadn't she mentioned this retreat until the night before she was supposed to leave? I played along, nodding and feigning interest as she went over the details, but inside, my mind was racing. This wasn't just a spa weekend. There was more to this story, and I needed to figure out what it was. The next day, Rachel left early, her bags packed, and her smile as bright as I'd seen it in weeks. I hugged her goodbye, watching her closely for any signs of guilt or hesitation, but she seemed completely at ease. Once she was gone, I sat down with her laptop, determined to find out more about this retreat. Her browser history revealed the name of the wellness center she was visiting, along with a confirmation email for her booking. The reservation seemed legitimate, but something caught my eye. The booking was for 2 people. My stomach tightened as I stared at the screen, my mind racing with possibilities. Who was the second person? Rachel hadn't mentioned going with a friend, and as far as I knew, she didn't have any close girlfriends who'd be interested in something like this. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that this wasn't just a girl's trip. I decided to dig deeper, scrolling through her email for more clues. That's when I found another confirmation, this time for a car rental. The driver's name listed on the reservation wasn't Rachel's. It was Ryan's. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Rachel hadn't been honest about this trip, and now I had a new layer of suspicion to unravel. Was Ryan going with her? And if so, why? This wasn't just about massages anymore. Something bigger was happening, and I was closer than ever to finding out the truth. I didn't confront Rachel right away. Instead, I decided to use the weekend to my advantage. With her out of the house, I had the freedom to investigate without worrying about her noticing. I started by calling the wellness center, pretending to confirm her reservation. The receptionist was polite and helpful, confirming Rachel's booking and casually mentioning that the second guest had already checked in. The second guest. My hands shook as I hung up the phone, my mind racing with questions I didn't want answers to. Ryan was already there, waiting for her. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was deliberate, planned, and carefully hidden. I sat back in my chair, the weight of the situation sinking in. Rachel had been lying to me for weeks, and now she was spending the weekend with her masseur under the guise of a wellness retreat. The betrayal felt more real than ever, but I knew I couldn't confront her until I had everything I needed. I wasn't expecting Linda to show up in my office that day. It had been weeks since Rachel's former masseuse had moved away, leaving her son Ryan to take over her clients. When Linda walked in, she didn't look like the calm, composed professional I remembered. She was tense, her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes carried an intensity that instantly put me on edge. She sat down, not bothering with pleasantries, her movements sharp and purposeful. I could feel the weight of whatever she was about to say before she even began. It was clear she wasn't here for a casual catch-up or to discuss logistic services for her business. Something was wrong, and whatever it was going to hit hard. Linda's frustration was palpable, her body language radiating anger and disbelief. She explained the situation with an urgency that left no room for misunderstanding. Her son, Ryan, had been acting out of character lately, distracted, emotional, and increasingly defiant. He told her about a new relationship, one he described as exciting and deeply meaningful. At first, Linda had been happy for him, thinking he'd found someone special. But when she pressed for details, the truth unraveled. The woman Ryan had been seeing was Rachel. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Linda explained that Ryan had no idea Rachel was married. According to him, she presented herself as single, independent, and looking for something more in life. He'd fallen for her completely, believing their connection was genuine. Linda was furious, not just at Rachel for her lies, but at Ryan for ignoring her warnings. She tried to talk sense into him, to make him see how destructive this situation was, but he wouldn't listen. He was too caught up in the fantasy Rachel had created. Her anger grew as she described how Ryan had started shutting her out, refusing to acknowledge the mess he was in. Linda felt powerless, watching her son spiral, while Rachel continued to manipulate him. She explained that Ryan wasn't just risking his professional reputation, but also his emotional well-being. He'd placed Rachel on a pedestal, oblivious to the lies she'd told and the life she was hiding. Linda's frustration turned to desperation as she detailed her attempts to intervene. She'd tried reasoning with Ryan, but he dismissed her concerns, accusing her of meddling. She'd even tried reaching out to Rachel indirectly, hoping to confront her without involving me, but Rachel had dodged every opportunity to talk. Linda was at her wit's end, unable to get through to either of them. Her decision to come to me wasn't easy. She admitted she wasn't sure if I knew about Rachel's affair or if I'd even believe her, but she felt she had no other choice. Ryan wasn't listening to her, and Rachel showed no signs of stopping. Linda believed I was the only person who could put an end to this. If I didn't step in, she feared the fallout would destroy not just my marriage but her son's life as well. Her words left me reeling. Rachel's betrayal was bad enough, but the fact that she'd lied to Ryan about being married added a new layer of deceit I hadn't fully grasped before. She hadn't just hurt me. She dragged an unsuspecting young man into her mess, feeding him lies and making him complicit in her betrayal. Linda left shortly after, her frustration still etched on her face. She hadn't come to me looking for comfort or reassurance. She wanted action, a resolution to the chaos Rachel had created. As I sat alone in my office, her words echoed in my mind, each one sharpening the anger and determination I'd been trying to suppress. Rachel hadn't just betrayed me. She'd built an entire web of lies, dragging others into her deception. Her actions had hurt not just me, but Ryan and Linda as well, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The confrontation I'd been avoiding was now inevitable. I knew what I had to do. The time for waiting and gathering evidence was over. It was time to confront Rachel, to lay everything out and force her to face the consequences of her choices. When Rachel called to tell me she'd be delayed for a few more days at the retreat, I could feel my chest tighten. Her tone was light, casual, as though extending her time away was the most natural thing in the world. She explained that the retreat had been so rejuvenating that she wanted to stay a little longer to make the most of it. Her voice carried no trace of guilt or hesitation, but that only made it worse. It was as if she was completely unaware of the chaos she'd been creating behind her. After the call ended, I stared at my phone, the weight of her words pressing down on me. This wasn't just a wellness retreat. This was an escape, a carefully constructed excuse to buy herself more time. Time for what? To spend with Ryan? To keep lying to me? Whatever the reason, it was clear that Rachel wasn't coming back as the same woman who'd left. I decided then and there that waiting for her return wasn't an option anymore. I couldn't sit idly by, letting the lies fester while she continued to weave her story. It was time to act. I spent the next few hours combing through every piece of information I had, determined to gather as much evidence as possible before confronting her. If this was going to end, it would end on my terms. The first step was her laptop. Rachel had always been meticulous with her digital life, keeping her emails and calendar tightly organized. It wasn't hard to find the threads that tied everything together. Her email history with Ryan revealed more than I wanted to see, casual exchanges that gradually grew more personal, then flirtatious, until they were unmistakably intimate. The timestamps aligned perfectly with her increasingly frequent massage appointments, each one another nail in the coffin of her lies. Her phone records were next. I hadn't checked them before, but now I was determined to leave no stone unturned. The call logs were filled with Ryan's number, their conversations often lasting late into the night. It was clear their relationship wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a betrayal that cut deeper than I thought possible. The wellness retreat itself was another piece of the puzzle. I dug into the reservation details, cross-referencing them with the information I'd found earlier. Everything pointed to Ryan being there with her. They'd planned this together, disguised as an innocent getaway, but steeped in lies. She hadn't just lied to me. She'd lied to herself, creating a fantasy that couldn't last. I organized everything meticulously. Screenshots of emails, call logs, the car rental receipt with Ryan's name, and even the booking details from the retreat. Every piece of evidence told the same story. Rachel's betrayal wasn't a fleeting mistake. It was deliberate, calculated, and sustained. As I gathered the final pieces of proof, I contacted a lawyer. I explained the situation, laying out the timeline and providing the evidence I collected. The lawyer's response was measured and professional, but I could hear the sympathy in their voice. They assured me that the case was strong, that the evidence would make the divorce proceedings clear-cut. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of control returning to my life. Filing for divorce was both a relief and a heartbreak. I'd spent years building a life with Rachel, believing in the partnership we'd created. To see it unravel so completely, to know that the woman I thought I knew had chosen lies over honesty, was devastating. But it was also freeing. I couldn't let her betrayal define me. This was my chance to take back my life, to rebuild without the weight of her deceit dragging me down. By the time I finished filing the necessary paperwork, I felt a sense of resolve I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my peace, and my future. Rachel's choices had led us here, but my decisions would shape what came next. As I sat in the quiet of our home, surrounded by the remnants of a life we'd shared, I realized the magnitude of what I was doing. This wasn't just a legal process. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of Rachel's lies. The evidence was collected, the paperwork was filed, and the wheels were set in motion. All that was left now was to confront Rachel and let her know that the truth had finally caught up with her. The confrontation wasn't going to be a shouting match or an emotional outburst. That's not my style. Rachel had been methodical in her betrayal, weaving lies into the fabric of our life, and I intended to unravel them just as carefully. If she thought she was clever enough to deceive me, she was about to learn otherwise. When Rachel returned from her retreat, she walked into the house with the same bright, relaxed energy she'd had when she left. She dropped her bags by the door and greeted me with a wide smile, acting as though everything was normal. I matched her energy, keeping my expression neutral, even welcoming. I asked about her trip, listened as she told me about the meditative workshops and healing techniques she'd experienced, all while silently marveling at her ability to lie so effortlessly. The next evening, I made my move. I told her I'd prepared something special to celebrate her return, a little dinner to show how much I'd missed her. She seemed touched, even slightly guilty, which only made my plan more satisfying. I'd spent the day preparing, not just the dinner, but the presentation of my evidence. As we sat at the table, candles flickering softly between us, I handed her a small gift bag. She looked surprised, her eyes lighting up with curiosity. I told her it was a souvenir I'd found that reminded me of her retreat. She pulled out a carefully folded envelope from the bag, her brow furrowing as she opened it. Inside was the printed itinerary of her wellness retreat, complete with her name and Ryan's as her +1. Beneath it was a copy of the car rental receipt bearing Ryan's name. Her face drained of color as she realized what she was holding. But before she could speak, I handed her the final piece, a folder containing screenshots of her emails and texts with Ryan, as well as the call logs that left no room for doubt. Rachel sat frozen, staring at the evidence in her hands. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The confidence she'd worn so effortlessly for weeks was gone, replaced by a look of pure panic. She tried to speak, stammering something about misunderstandings and context, but I raised a hand to stop her. "You don't need to explain," I said calmly. "I know everything." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint crackle of the candles. Rachel's shoulders slumped as the weight of her lies finally caught up with her. I could see the realization in her eyes, that this wasn't a fight she could win, that there was no way to spin the narrative in her favor. I stood, picking up my plate and glass. "I hope the retreat was worth it," I said as I walked away, leaving her sitting alone at the table with the evidence of her betrayal spread out before her. That night, Rachel tried to talk to me, but I refused to engage. I didn't want her apologies or excuses. The paperwork had already been filed, and the process was in motion. Her words couldn't undo what she'd done, and I wasn't interested in playing the role of a forgiving husband.